What's going on, everybody? Ryan the Mighty Quinn here on the Cornerman _MMA. Uh, Not so breaking news anymore, but I know I want to discuss it. I mentioned it in a couple other videos. So, UFC and USADA have not so amicably split ways. Very interesting that the breakup happened in the way that did. Um, well, to as the video is titled, USADA had its flaws. It did, plain and simple. Um, Almost like they were very proud to rest on their laurels. I will get into that in a little bit. I wasn't a UFC athlete. We'll talk about the good that USADA did, and it all come together. So going back, I remember in 2014, I I noticed a very uptick in steroid use in 2012, 2014. I started using not just in the UFC, whether it was people coming in to train or people I was competing with, other fight motions. I noticed performance enhancing drugs being rampant. It was really coming up, and it's funny when it comes to performance enhancing drugs. It didn't necessarily make anyone that I know um, faster, stronger, um, or even the roid rages. Although those happen too. I noticed the best way I could put it is like if I was training with somebody that I knew was using, um, if I was beating them or I was edging them on Monday, come Friday, Saturday, I couldn't keep up with them. So the recovery was through the roof for these fighters. That's why Logan Ryan said, fighters would be healthier and long lasting. Yes and no. The recovery was just amicable, and I remember there was a couple times where last minute fighters that weren't using, they get a last minute call somewhere, they can't make the weight. Someone who was using, you know, and be able to cut a lot more weight. That's another type of that's not a steroid, but anyway, that's a diuretic. But I'm not going to get into that. Well, I did. That's the extent of it. But either way, I wasn't the only one who noticed clearly. The UFC was noticing it as well. Other promotions were, but they were kind of. I think personally that like Bellator, there was no PFL at the time. I think that personally, like Bellator, like those other promotions, that they were aware of their fighters using, but they were like, "Oh, you know what? Let's just look this way because we're trying to catch ground with the UFC. We need these fighters active." That's my belief. That's why a lot of them were prevalent on testing, which all changed. So then I believe that it was summer of 20. Oh yeah, spring summer 2015. I remember the UFC announces that they're going to be working with USADA. I forgot what the last straw was that preempted it, but it was like we're going to clean this up. And I remember, I was at American Top Team at the time, and we were, we were the, we had the most fighters on the UFC roster than any other team. So the UFC was in South Florida for an event at Fort Lauderdale. Lambert had them come talk to the USADA was there as well. Lambert had had it set up where a representative of the UFC, he called a team meeting, or USADA rather. He wanted them to speak with us to let us know what's going to happen next or how things are going to go going forward. Because it was, as you've seen, it was a lot more than just PEDs that people were getting popped for. And he didn't want anybody making any mistakes. And it was a great move because it was a lot of these fighters they found out on the fly, and like we had a leg up because we knew what traps not to fall in. And by we, I mean also when the UFC brought USADA in, this is why it was such a good idea. It prompted other major organizations to administer a stricter anti-doping clause, and I applaud them for that. So I remember there was a couple of big things. There was the obvious, well, whoever the representative was, I remember it was Forrest Griffin. He was kind of a liaison, like to catch our eyes. And it was, I forgot who the gentleman's name was that spoke with us that represented USADA. But the one thing that stuck out to me was he was extremely proud that USADA was the ones to catch Lance Armstrong. And they really wanted to set that precedent. That's what I meant that like resting on yesterday's laurels. Because, things evolve, things change. And Like, that's what he wanted to talk to us about for a while. And then they worked with other major groups. And he did come off similar to what Chael Sonnen said. He did come off like USADA was a government-funded agency that was coming from the Senate. I didn't know that until this split, that wasn't the case, to be honest with you. They're privately funded. Or maybe they get government sponsorship. But anyway, so now they're talking about that, and then they get into how things are going to be for the fighters rostered on the UFC. And then they talked about how there will be no more intravenous IVs, no more IVs. I was a fighter that used IVs. I was like, ooh, yeah. And then after, I stopped using them. And I honestly didn't notice the difference. It forced me to be healthier with my weight cut. So I thought that was actually a great idea. And actually around that time, that's when you saw a lot of fighters, they were moving up in weight because the IVs really help you to replenish at a shorter period of time. What you can get through intravenous, it goes in your blood system. I think it's like 3 or 4 times faster than if you drank it to hydrate yourself. So that's why you saw a lot of fighters moving up in weight. I know that a lot of fighters noticed the non-use of intravenous. I remember with the Weed fight, everyone thought that was a big player against Luke Rockhold. But so that was one thing. No more IVs. Everyone's kind of bugged about that. Obviously, the PED use. But then they also told us about there was going to be a list of drugs that could be caught in over-the-counter stuff that a lot of the fighters had to be made aware of, which I thought was interesting. But at the same time, it's like that you can get popped for. And then that was that was a little scary for a fighter. The whole USADA run, you saw fighters were getting popped for stuff from over the counter all the time. And fighters, even if it was medication for a sickness or some kind of disease you have, or what am I talking about? Pre-existing condition you have, fighters were getting popped for that all the time. And there was I remember when they said it's 2-year suspension, no ifs, ands, or buts. We are the judge, jury, and executioner. And there was no wiggle room on that. And I felt that was a little bit of a disadvantage because a lot of the stuff, like I said, is over the counter. Like similar to I know in some NCAA schools, they had stuff that was being sold in their gyms in the gym, like in the shake bar or whatever, that you couldn't take in NCAAs, and nobody knew because it was such a small sample size in these things. And I remember that scared a lot of fighters, and obviously it caused everyone to shape things up. And they did offer you they did offer a way to track things. Like, let's say I got a protein powder, a canister of protein. You take a scoop, you put it in a plastic bag, and you date it, and you save it for a year or something like that. So then they could test that if you pop positive and you're not sure. But either way, it was very loose. It was very, here's what it is. It's like giving me a grocery list in French. I'm not going to know how to read it. That's how I took it as. And a lot of fighters had to learn the hard way over that. Some fighters tried to say they learned the hard way over that, but it is what it is. And then it was an automatic 2-year suspension. Crazy. 2-year suspension is a lot for a lot of fighters. That's could be your career. And then of course we've seen some of the 5-year suspensions. And then I remember also they talked about the random testing, like they text you when they're at your door, please, give us a piss test right now. That was annoying, but people kind of dealt with it. Now, I applaud the UFC. They were extremely compliant with USADA. There was no, especially in the beginning, there was no, I remember a lot of the fighters would say when something happened, I'm going to see what Dana says, and Dana and administrations can't help you. This is their rules. We're cleaning this stuff up. They weren't, USADA had free reign. They had the keys. There was no pushback from the UFC whatsoever. They let USADA run the show, and fighters complied as well. And I remember there was a lot of times too where it's like, oh well, I wasn't here. I had to run here, and they couldn't test me because they said I wasn't home, and I wasn't trying to avoid them. Blah blah blah. There was a lot of things like that. I remember towards the end, the UFC tried seeing if there was a way we can comply, and USADA didn't want to hear it for the most part. That was my understanding. Now, Travis Tigert. Now we're gone. Let's circle back forward. what is it, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, 8 years later. So Travis Tiger comes forward saying that it was over the situation with Conor McGregor, that the UFC wanted to part ways with us. Now that I thought that was a cheap excuse. That was a cheap shot over everything that's going on, especially because the UFC's been nothing but compliant with them, especially with their big star John Jones. And I truly believe that, because contract negotiations are coming up, or they're going on now, and they're not going USADA's way, that they did try to throw that low blow in there. I think that maybe they overextended themselves, USADA, that they felt that, that everyone recognizes us as the big fish, that they're going to stay with us after that. And I think the UFC said, no thanks. This clearly isn't going in the same direction. Dana White called Taggart a scumbag, and we're moving on. And I thought that was very poor execution on Travis Taggart. I thought that kind of gave USADA a black eye, because there is other Drug Enforcement Administration groups out there. Bellator uses one, or the commissions use them, and there's other markets to grab that at. They worked very well. The UFC did put USADA on the map. I'm sure a lot more people learned about USADA through the UFC than they did through Lance Armstrong. Now, it's really interesting to see what's going forward. That situation is not going to be mended. I think that that USADA really, stepped in it, and we'll see what happens from there. UFC is going to find somebody else. Oh, well, they got George Filippo. I see George all the time at American Top Team. Great guy, very involved with the sport, very supportive of the fighters. And if you read his book, he was a spy out in Iraq or Afghanistan. I forgot what it was. Clearly, I haven't read the book. I've only had conversations with the guy, but I've never asked him about that. Extremely humble individual. Really looking forward. I know he's going to do right by the fighters, by the UFC, by the whole sport. And they're already moving in the right direction with a very honest individual who's not going to handle pity parties, so to speak. Not that he would have one the way USADA just did. So UFC is already moving in a good direction. Now, to sum it up, what I felt about the situation with Conor McGregor, I felt that it's a very convenient time. Timing is everything. It's a very convenient time for for USADA to just cut bait and say, "Oh, it's over Conor McGregor that we're not doing this." And I think that was really cheap. I thought that was really low. And overall, it wasn't true. You saw Conor would have competed prior. It had it been this, and it's really poor taste. Either way, I think the UFC is going to be fine. I think the sport's going to be fine. I think that other drug enforcement agencies are going to be more prevalent now, and USADA will recover. USADA will recover. All right, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Tune in to Fight Court on Wednesday, as well as Fight Bananas on Wednesday. Got a lot to discuss. Bye.